All right. Well, we got the technical difficulty out of the way early there. Oh no.
We all have some technical difficulties sometimes. All right.
All right. And I see Steve is in the viewers section, so that's a good sign. So we'll go ahead and you guys want to introduce yourselves, and we'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll add Steve on here and get things rolling.
Yeah, 1 second. I'm pulling it up on my laptop so I can check comments here. It keeps buffering for me, but hopefully it's working for everybody. Obviously, if you guys have trouble, let us know in the comments. Anyway, I think a lot of you already know who we are, but for those of you who don't, or for new people in the group, I'm Kari and my husband Kyle.
Hi, I'm Kyle.
We left meetings a little over 3 years ago, and we started this group with Mike and Abby 2 years ago. So yeah, that's us.
Yep, I'm Mike, and
I'm Abby.
This is Abby, and we left the 2x2 church in 2010, shortly after we got married, and then yeah, in 2022, Kyle and Kari asked us if we wanted to start this support group, and we said yes. Let's make ourselves publicly part of a support group that will be for the church that we grew up in and all our friends and family are in. That sounds fantastic. And so we did it.
Well, we didn't know just how public that was going to be.
Yeah, we didn't know how public it was going to be.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and get Steve in here.
Sounds great. You can watch. That happened to me too. You can just watch the comments without the video. Like, I have it up here and I didn't push play. Oh, no, sorry.
Hello.
So the wrong way?
Nope. Now you're the wrong way, so I think you got to switch it.
This way?
Sorry. Yeah. So you're going to look at yourself sideways, but we can see you right side up.
I'm looking at myself sideways.
Same with us. Same with us.
Stay with
but
us.
It looks good on the screen.
I have my stand for this way, not this way. So how is this? Is this a good framing or not so good?
It looks great.
That's great.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'm going to be really weird looking at myself sideways for an hour. But
every now and then, I'm sure our heads will start tilting every time we, yeah. Well, Steve, thank you very much for taking the time to jump on here with us. And yeah, we look forward to hearing what you have to say and getting to know more about the bite model and everything you've been working on.
Is Steve all right, or do you prefer Dr. Hassan, or what can we call you?
I did get my doctorate in 2020. I did my dissertation on how to update the law regarding undue influence using my bite model and influence continuum and trafficking law. So that was the big lift. But yeah, I've written 4 books. And, you know, my story briefly is I was recruited at age 19 when I was a student at Queens College into a front group of a Korean cult where the leader claimed to be the Messiah. He claimed that Jesus came to him and asked him to finish his unfinished job to save the planet. And he claimed that Korea was now the chosen nation, no longer Israel. And long story short, I was deceived, I was mind controlled, and dropped out of college and donated my bank account, believed my family was Satan, and became a leader. And fell asleep at the wheel of a van. I should say I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night, 7 days a week, working for the group for no money, because World War III, Armageddon was going to happen in 1977, but got got into a near fatal van crash that got me away from the group. That led to me calling my sister, which led to a deprogramming where I was so sure I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed. I was so sure I was doing God's will that I wanted to prove to my family that I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed. So I was going to talk to those deprogrammers and show them the truth. Then I learned about Chinese communist brainwashing, and all the 8 criteria fit my group. That was a problem. And then I realized when I was asked on the last day of the agreed upon deprogramming, I was shown one of the Mooney documents where Moon was speaking to congressmen and senators, and they just said, "What do you think of this, Steve?" And they handed me the speech, and I'm reading it, and I have the first negative thought in 2.5 years. I'm reading it and I go, what a liar. About Moon,
Right.
the Messiah, the sinless man, the greatest man in human history, the one that Jesus bows down to, and Muhammad and Buddha and every American president and yada, yada, yada. I was like, he's a liar. If he's a liar, well, we believe in a God of truth. How could he be a liar and be God's representative? The wheels were very rusty. I was only in 2.5 years, but it was like very intense 2.5 years. And I just had remembered 100 meetings with him personally, because I was a leader, where he was saying how crappy Americans were and how Koreans were superior and et cetera, et cetera. So my own experience versus what he was saying publicly was like, this can't be. And then I cried for 3 hours.
Wow.
And then I was like, I don't know what to do. I gave up everything. I gave my heart, my soul. I felt so angry at God. I felt like God had betrayed me because I was praying 2 to 3 hours a day in the cult. And this was 1976, I should add. I was 22 years old. And I just wanted to understand what happened to me. Like, how did this, I felt like my mind had been hijacked. And I started reading everything I could. And my brain needed time to learn how to read again because I hadn't read anything. I was a creative writing major. I was reading 2 books a week, normally. And then I'm in a cult for 2.5 years and all I read is cult literature,
Right.
period.
Wow.
So my brain was rusty. I had to remember words. What a word, what's this word mean? Like my brain was not functioning. But, and I knew I wanted to go back and finish college, but I knew I wasn't ready. So I was like, I'm going to go back in a year. And then I had a tremendous amount of guilt over all the people I had recruited into the cult. So I wanted to get them out. And then families started approaching me to get their loved ones out of the Moonies. And I was like, yes, I will help you. So
Wow.
long story short, you're meeting me 47 years later. I became a mental health professional. I've authored 4 books, 2 masters and a doctorate. And I'm full time on this work because I really feel like I had a unique experience and I could share my knowledge and my full-time experience de-radicalizing people, helping people who are trafficked, labor and sex trafficked, people in Jewish cults, Christian cults, Muslim cults, Hindu cults, Buddhist cults, atheist cults, online cults. So I just want to circle back to the support group because I was asked, when did I become aware for the first time of 2x2s? It must have been 78 after Jonestown is my recollection, 79. And when I wrote my first book, Combating Cult Mind Control, it came out in 1988, is when I was hearing from a ton of people. This was way before the internet. So snail mail is what people, and sometimes faxes, it was a different era for all you young people who are like, really? You didn't have cell phones? It's like, no, we didn't have cell phones. That was 2008 or 9, This is way back when. And people, looked at me and were like, you're an extra honor student. How could you be so stupid as to get into this cult? How could you be so stupid as to throw out all of your original poetry because they wanted you to prove your love of God and your obedience to the group? It's like, because that was my reality. Like my critical thinking, my real self was offline, and my cult identity was online, which is one of my first points I want to make before we get to the influence continuum and bite model. So again, I've been doing this for a really long time as a mental health professional. The best way to understand mind control is it's a dissociative disorder. What that means is it's a disruption of your identity.
Right.
Now, in my case, I had a very established identity before the Moonies. Then I had a very clear Moonie identity. And then I was in a period of a year of mass confusion and like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what to believe. I don't know if I can trust anybody. I can't trust myself. I had been in this bad accident. I had a cast on my leg from my toes to my groin. But so I want people to understand, if they ever hear from cult apologists or propagandists that there's no such thing as brainwashing or mind control, it ain't so. In the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic Statistical Manual, version 5, it's called Unspecified Dissociative Disorder 300.15. I don't know if people can see this screen.
Yeah.
I don't know if you
Yep.
can read this, but it literally talks about cults, brainwashing, coercive persuasion, thought reform, and a disruption of identity. So I have this slide on my course. I have courses on my website, in my books. But mental health professionals are not trained how to work with people born or raised in cults or recruited into cults. So they don't have a clue about how to work with folks. They're like, oh, you were traumatized, or oh, your family's still in the group and you've left it and they've shunned you. Too bad. They don't understand the cult identity and how it's programmed.
Right.
So what I want to do now for a few minutes, and then I really want to have interaction, and I'd rather you ask me questions if you don't mind. And I should say freedomofmind.com is my website. I have a number of other websites. And so let's see, is this the right way to put the influence continuum up for you to see?
There.
It's not backwards. It's not backwards to me.
It is backwards to us, but I don't think there's a way to change that necessarily.
Yeah, you'd have to flip the. It's not upside down.
It's too confusing. Go to my website.
I can share it in the group too.
Yeah, share it in the group, but I'm going to use it here for me.
Yeah.
That's fine. But I want people to understand influence is not all the same, that there's healthy ethical influence with informed consent, all the way over to the unethical, unhealthy influence, which is lying, overt lying, withholding vital information, or distorting information. And here is where the pseudo identity gets created. Here's where healthy parenting, healthy families, healthy religion exists. And I'll just say that in this graphic, we put healthy for individuals, healthy for leadership, healthy here, unhealthy. Healthy organizations, unhealthy organizations, as a way of sorting things out, because that's part of the issue of when you're coming out of a group is you're confused. And you were in an environment where you were always told truth is a single thing, and you follow whatever the authority or the ideology tells you it is. Don't trust your own judgment, your own common sense, your own gut feelings. Don't it, and if anything goes wrong, it's your fault. It's not the doctrine, it's not the group. It's always so when you're coming out of that, you're like, hey, what? And this is a really easy way to start sorting things through. And I'll just say a healthy family, if you weren't born in a cult, a healthy family, the parents realize each child is a unique person, a unique soul, and a healthy parent's job is to do developmentally appropriate parenting with the goal of the person growing up to be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Versus being obedient and dependent and being a clone of the parents or of the group on the unhealthy side, if that makes sense. And this is another thing with people born and raised in cults, because I've worked with thousands of people over the decades, is they need to understand what's normal and healthy. It's a part of the healing, not just what's wrong with the group and why do I want to be out of it. So we can go more into this, but what I want to say is that I studied brainwashing in China. Robert J. Lifton's book was used in my deprogramming, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, and I have interviews with him. He's still alive. He's 95. Margaret Singer, Army psychologist, studied brainwashing. Edgar Schein, another one in the military. So I took the brainwashing models, and as I was sorting through it, I learned about Leon Festinger and cognitive dissonance theory, which is the root of cognitive behavioral therapy. And Festinger studied a UFO cult, and he realized that the leader was saying a spaceship was going to land on a certain mountaintop, and people sold their homes and everything else to go up to the mountaintop. And then, of course, there was no spaceship. So he wanted to know, how would people react? Would they lose faith and leave, or what? And people had more faith after it didn't happen, because the leader flipped the storyline and said, because you were faithful, we decided to spare the earth from destruction, right? So everyone was really, yes, I sold my house, now I have nothing, but we saved the earth. So he called it cognitive dissonance theory. So he said we have thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and we do extreme behaviors and then we rationalize them to feel good about ourselves. So I took thoughts, feelings, behaviors. I wonder if I could take all the brainwashing models and put them into those three categories. So I started thinking about and the BITE model stands for behavior control, information, thought, and emotional control. Regulating your physical environment, dictating who you live with, how much you sleep, how you have sex, what kind of clothing. So I just started listing all the things from the Moonies. And then as I met people from the Scientology, Children of God, the Krishnas, and other cults, I started identifying patterns. So I came up with the BITE model: behavior control, information, thought, and emotional control. But then I'm thinking there's something else that I'm missing. And what I basically realized that information control is the critical thing, because I never would have gotten in without being deceived.
Right.
I never would have stayed in if I had access to ex-members and critics, if I could read outside newspapers. You know, the indoctrination was propaganda over and over and over again. That people would tattle on each other in order to keep people in line, right? So when my book came out in '88, I had the 4 components, but it was actually a Christian minister friend of mine who helped me with a bunch of cases. He said, he's a Texan, he said, Steve, you could change the order and call it BITE, and then people could remember it. I'm like, buddy, what a great idea. can I use it? He said, absolutely. So anyway, it's now all over the internet, bite model, bite
Yeah.
model. And I'm going into it a little bit more because I did my doctoral dissertation on it, and it's a scientifically validated construct for authoritarian control. It's based on trafficking law, which is illegal internationally, fraud, force, or coercion.
Right.
And sex trafficking experts and labor trafficking experts use the bite model because it's more robust in a way to explain to judges, juries, and survivors, this is how the pimp groomed you or the trafficker did these things. So, and I'm mentioning all of this because we have another guest, Robert, is on our Facebook Live, and he's literally just created a bite model analyzer application where anyone who's listening, if they want to check it out with these details of all of these things, they can go on and fill it out anonymously. And then if we get hundreds or thousands of responses, we could write a scientific journal article about people from the 2x2s. Here's how they control behavior. Here's how they control information. Here's how they control thoughts. Here's how they control emotions and make people dependent and obedient. So, so that's my introductory comments. But I really love interaction.
Yeah.
So ask away.
Well, yeah. So I think maybe after a little while we will get Robert on here and he can talk a little bit more about
Great.
that. I think the first thing I want to mention is you mentioned that you became aware of the 2x2s as early as like 1978, which was quite a surprise. I think it was a surprise to Kyle and Kari as well. It certainly surprised me. And so was that just ex-members reaching out to you through snail mail back then?
Back then, there were some parent groups that were organizing at churches and synagogues and at community centers and libraries. And I was kind of well known because I was the highest up, recent defector of the Moonies. I became a whistleblower for a congressional subcommittee. So, and it was very important part of my healing, frankly, and this is a message I want to give to your members. It was very healing for me to meet people from other cults because when I could listen to their stories, I could see the parallels, but I could also be like, that was really messed up. How could you believe that crazy crap? And then they would be, Steve, you were in a Korean cult where they would do mass weddings and strangers who didn't even speak the same language were married to each other and hit each other with a wooden stick. And I'm like, you're right. My group was really freaking weird. But the point is that the cure to blind faith is perspective, right?
Yep.
Once you get out of your own experience and start going, oh, this is how ISIS recruits people and makes them into terrorists. This is how pimps work. This is how, then it's like, oh, and I thought my group was so special. There was actually a formula here.
That's so true. And when you grow up in it, and especially if you're born and raised in it, your brain normalizes all of these things. And then when you leave and you're able to take a step back, you start realizing how crazy some of it is.
Yeah, exactly. And before we finish in another 35 whatever minutes, I can stay a few minutes extra. I want to talk about some healing strategies and recovery strategies because as I said earlier, people who are mental health professionals are not taught how to work with this population. They just aren't. So they either ignore really important information or signs, or they can't label it as a cult because it's a religion. So you can't criticize it because it's a religion. And I'm like, come on. There are political cults, therapy cults, there are cults, personality cults, where the malignant narcissist controls one other person. There are large group awareness training cults. Hey, China's a cult. China's an authoritarian cult. So is Russia.
Mhm.
And if I can be political, Trump wants to make a dictatorship in the United States and turn this into one MAGA cult.
Along the lines of religious trauma, how do you feel about the idea of having religious trauma added to the DSM-5 or the next edition?
So what I want to say is that I and my colleagues are pretty critical of the DSM, and we say that it's very useful for research purposes, and it's very useful for insurance reimbursements, because if you want to be reimbursed as a provider, it's got to be in the book. Otherwise, they can't, it's not real, even though it's very real. The thing is this is in, but almost nobody knows to use it. And I tell former members, if you're in therapy, you need to tell your therapist to read Combating Cult Mind Control, take the 9-hour CE credits, continuing ed credits, because mental health professionals, if they have a license, have to have continuing ed stuff, because I go over the basics. And I had two very renowned psychiatrists take the course, one from McLean's Hospital, one from Cleveland Clinic, both very famous institutions. They took the course and they went, oh my God, Steve, we have people inpatient right now who we never realized were in an authoritarian cults as children. And we've labeled them schizophrenic, schizoaffective, borderline personality disorder, bipolar, and a number of other things, because they didn't even know to ask. Oh, the Jehovah's Witnesses, mind control cult. Oh, the Mormons, mind control cult. But they're so big and they're in politics and in the media. It's like, yeah, but that's not the criteria for whether a group is destructive, from my point of view.
Right. So have you ever seen a cult effectively closed down, and if so, like what led to that?
So cults end when the leader dies and doesn't designate heirs. And sometimes cult leaders die, and then a bunch of sub-leaders declare they're now the prophet or the apostle, and they get revelations from God, and they start their own splinter cults. And one of the analogies I like to use to describe this disorder is that it's a virus. It's a mind control virus, and it mutates. And if you're raised in one of these environments and don't understand and leave it, and you don't get counseling, you can be particularly susceptible to going into another controlling relationship or group, or you can be afraid and never get involved again, and never marry and never get higher education, etc. Or you can start your own cult. And just as there's a small percentage of people who are sexually molested as children go on to become predators, it's a small percentage of people who are in mind control cults who go on to start their own cults.
Right.
Yeah, and another important thing I'd like to share, and I put this in chapter 3 of my book, The Cult of Trump, is a designation called malignant narcissism. It was something that was written up by Erich Fromm in the 40s, post-Hitler. And I'm just going to quickly read this. This is on my website. You can download it for free along with the Influence Continuum and the Bite model. So there's regular narcissism, and then there's the psychopathological piece. But this is the stereotypical profile of all cult leaders. So if you know these, you can protect yourself from 80, 90% of bad situations in the future. Grandiose, self-centered behavior. Fantasies of power, success, and attractiveness. Need for praise and attention and admiration. Sense of entitlement. Lack of empathy. This is one of the more important ones. People who are narcissists, they can act like they're empathetic, but they're not feeling it. And that's how predators can have sex with children and not have any conscience about it. Right? So lack of empathy. But now we get into the psychopathological stuff. So they think they're above the law. They're pathological liars. They're interpersonally exploitative. They're sadistic, harassing and silencing, violent, paranoid, and can't trust friends or subordinates. So this is what you want to watch out for, people. Like, teach your children. Anybody with these characteristics, don't befriend them, don't hang out with them. And why they're so successful is they're charming. Right. They know how to make you feel special. They know how to look in your eyes and you feel like you've known them your whole life. But these are manipulation techniques.
So specific to the 2x2s, there is no, single leader or anything like that. But there are certainly a number of leaders within the church. And I think I've heard you say before that you can definitely have a high control group that doesn't have a single leader.
Yeah, that's where I differ with some of my colleagues who put the shingle out that they're experts and they say you need to have a charismatic leader. That's not my experience. You can have an ideological cult without that individual. However, if you look back in time to your former cult, there was a leader at one time before he died.
Yep.
Right?
Sure.
But now the virus mutated intergenerationally and spread around the world. And there's another cult. If your folks don't know about William Branham and the Message churches, this is a cult that started in, I think, 1926. I have a number of interviews with a former third generation of that cult. The Kenya cult, where people were not eating and drinking because the prophet said it's the last days and hundreds of people and children died. That was a Message church.
Okay.
So just, again, knowing about other groups, it gives you a perspective on your own. And in the end, I have my criteria, but in the end, everyone has to figure things out for themselves of what their understanding is of their experience, etc.
You mentioned people leaving one cult and going into another cult. What's a good way to avoid that? What are some things that we could do? I think that when people leave, they're very emotionally vulnerable and maybe even extra vulnerable to being preyed upon by people like that. What are some ways that we could avoid that?
Or domestic violation.
Yeah, extra vulnerable for sure. For me, I'm an idealist. And I should also say I believe in God. I'm from the Jewish faith, but not the extreme Jewish faith. I'm from the, love tradition and do service and be nice to strangers and help the poor and the sick and the weak framework. But so for me, what my life work is really about trying to change the world, if I can be grandiose for a minute, and make this a known thing where we do preventive education in schools, not just anti-bullying campaigns, but where the influence continuum, the bite model, characteristics of predators are taught to inoculate people. It's similar to vaccination, if you will, against the mind control violence, teaching clinicians, educators, politicians, media, doing training, and then having recovery institutions to give people a way to leave, because when you're born in a group, your entire social network is in the group. And it makes people extremely vulnerable, especially with the cults that are male-centered and women are subordinate, and they're not encouraged to realize they have equal rights, and they're smart too, and have education, public education, with their science and mathematics and other things. So we need more recovery things. Regarding your question, the most important thing is just being able, and I'm going to quote a former FBI trainer. His name was Jack Schaefer. He was training people to go undercover into criminal organizations, and he would teach his people, you name it and claim it. So he would say, here's the technique that's going to be used on you. So you say, oh, they're using law of reciprocity, or they're using social proof, or they're using hypnotic, methodology. It keeps you what's called meta to what is happening in your environment. If you've noticed, there's a million documentaries that are being done about different cult groups. There are many podcasts by former members. So there's a lot of us former members, right, that are wanting to not be in the shadows and feel like we need to be guilty and that was something wrong with us that we were in this. But like, hey, this exists, this is bad, this is wrong, we need to make a change. So to answer your question, just self-awareness that you were in an authoritarian group, that you are more vulnerable. And that's another point I want to make, if I may. I'll make it quickly, but that there's a very important concept in social psychology called the fundamental attribution error. And for anyone who's read my books, you've heard that term. But what it basically says is that people have an unconscious bias when they're trying to understand other human beings' behaviors. And they tend to overestimate dispositional variables or personality variables and underestimate the social influence variables. So why did Steve get in the Moonies? He was weak. He was stupid. He was from a bad family. He didn't have proper religious education. Instead of, Steve's girlfriend dumped him. 3 women flirted with him at the cafeteria at Queens College and flirted with him and made him believe that they were interested in him. And they lied, saying they were students, which they weren't. And they weren't part of a religious group, which they were. And then they isolated him at a retreat. You know what I'm saying? To explain the psychological, so situational vulnerabilities, death of a loved one, breakup of a relationship, illness, moving to a new city, state, or country. There's a list of situational vulnerabilities. And if you're moving or you're divorcing or something, you need to name it in your head. I'm in a vulnerable moment. I'm not going to just jump for the first person who expresses any kind of attention to me, but I'm going to do my homework and do a character analysis and interview their friends and find out if they have childhood friends, hear their story, etc. And make good decisions. And in the end, what I would lastly say about how to avoid getting sucked into a cult is be a good consumer. Like nowadays, you can go on Google, put the name of the group, plus cult, plus brainwashing, plus ex-members. Don't settle for the first 10 results, but dig down. And if the former members have a website up or there's a podcast, check it out. Because if it's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. The other thing is to ask direct questions. And if you don't get a direct answer really fast, you go, warning, warning, warning,
Or
like.
can't act.
So, when I love to go to recruitment scenarios when there's a new group I haven't heard and there's a free meditation thing or a free Bible study. I'll walk in and I'll be like, yeah, tell me about yourself. Who founded it? Well, there's a group of really devout Christians. Yeah, but what's the name of the person who runs this group? Well, maybe you need to talk to the person at the front of the room. Well, already it's like warning, warning, right? Are your financials available for public scrutiny? If you're a nonprofit religious group, let me see your books. Let me see how much the ministers are getting paid,
Yes.
please. Because legitimate groups have that transparency, and ones that don't will be like, Steve, you seem to be very skeptical. Do you have trust issues? Which is a typical cult. Turn it around on you. You have a problem because you're asking questions instead of they're not answering my questions. Like the problem is with them.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, and then I'll stop because I can talk on and on as you're getting the gist. You know, you can. I lost my train of thought. Anyway, let's move on.
Well, Steve, you had mentioned that for a lot of people, or most people, especially in the 2x2s, the majority of us were born and raised in it. It's our whole social network. So when people leave, they often lose their entire communities. So what do you recommend as far as how people can rebuild their communities, especially if they're in adulthood?
I think everyone's going to need to take responsibility for their own journey. And I can tell you that people who've left 10 years ago, 20 years ago, went on to get a career and have a family and raise them are probably going to be more stable and be able to offer more life advice than someone who's left in the last 12 months. So in that sense, but not everyone who's left 20 years ago even realizes they were in a cult or doesn't understand it yet, has what we call compartmentalized the experience. They put it in a closet, shut the door, and they don't want to talk about it or process it. My experience as a therapist is it's a lot of baggage to carry around. Like it's so much easier to process it and to heal yourself. A downside of just hanging out with ex-members of the group you were in is that there's a certain self-reinforcing element through the loaded language and the concepts. So I think, honestly, like inviting me in to, give a different perspective. Hey, an ex-Mooney's talking, who studied brainwashing. I think inviting ex-members of other groups in, like Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, and other things, and compare and contrast, strategies. One of the biggest problems former members have is they feel embarrassed to tell anybody. And for me, because I guess it's because of my personality or whatever, and then because I was only in 2.5 years, can I curse a little bit on this?
Yeah, yep.
Really?
When I got out, I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I was an extra honor student. How dare they do this to me? I'm going to tell the world about this group, and they can threaten to sue me, and they can threaten to harass me. And I say, right? That's been my attitude, and it hasn't slowed me down, and it feels good. It's part of, taking the lemons and making lemonade and then giving it to a lot of thirsty people.
Let's see. When it comes to accountability, how should we think about like institutional accountability versus personal accountability? Like, for instance, at least in the 2x2s, many of the enablers within the group are also victims themselves. And so, like, I guess, what's the best way to push for change in an environment like that?
So I always tell people, because people born in groups typically want to get their brother or sister or their father or their mother out. I say, heal yourself and then think about helping others. Like, do the homework and really understand the issues and learn how to articulate them and model that it's good to be out. Like, I can be out. And a lot of people decide, I don't want to believe in God. It doesn't work for me, and it needs to be okay. And some people say, no, I really want to believe in God. And then they have to do their homework and go on this journey. I like to recommend Karen Armstrong's book, The History of God. Um, she ran away from a convent. She was in a Catholic convent and became a world scholar in religions. And what I like about the book is it gives you an intellectual framework over time of some of the earliest religions that existed on planet Earth. Judaism was, recent in the amount of years that human beings have been around. There was all kinds of other religions before that, right? So use your intellect, and being part of a community is a human thing. It's not a weakness. And building friendship groups. I definitely encourage people to befriend people who have different beliefs than you, like deliberately.
Right.
Yeah, you don't want to be in a.
You don't want to be in a bubble, and you're if you're in a trusted friendship pod, you can also take turns being designating who's the contrarian this week, and they can be like, I don't know about that workshop you want to go to, Carrie. I think you should, you need to learn more about large group awareness trainings or multi-level marketing cults, and be, have that kind of role. And again, if something's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny.
How do you recommend interacting with friends and family who are still inside? They obviously.
Oh boy, that's another at least hour thing. I wrote a book called Freedom of Mind, my third book, which is a shortened version of my second book, Releasing the Bonds, Empowering People to Think for Themselves. There is what I call the strategic interactive approach. That's what I've evolved to versus deprogramming in the 70s of, having somebody sitting them down and giving them content about what was wrong with the group and what brainwashing is. And it's basically utilizing the Socratic method where you're engaging people with good listening skills, asking questions, really listening to the answers, doing follow-up questions. And the key is never attack the cult head on. Don't criticize the leader, the doctrine, or the policy head on with somebody in a cult, because their cult identity is trained to do thought stopping, has phobias installed to make people irrationally afraid, to question the group, that Satan's going to invade them or whatever. By the way, I was taken as a Moonie to see the Exorcist movie in 1974. And then Moon gave a lecture how God made the Exorcist movie. And this is what would happen to us if we left the Unification Church. So phobia indoctrination is a major mind control technique. And chapter 10 of Freedom of Mind, I talk about how to undo that. But back to the question, you never attack head on. So what works is talking about another group that they would agree is a bad group. So if they don't like the Jehovah's Witnesses and predators, they had their headquarters had a list of 35,000 sexual predators that got outed by a woman at headquarters a bunch of years back. Talking about another group they think is bad. The easiest ones these days is talking about Chinese communist brainwashing and pimps and traffickers. That's what I find most people will be curious to understand, how do pimps mind control people to become their slaves? And it's about giving them the pseudo identity, BITE, etc. So you can start a conversation and an education relationship where you can ask them to watch a video with you, like a documentary, like The Vow on the Nexium cult. Somebody mentioned that they watched that recently. There's so many other cult documentaries out there. Most of them suck, honestly, in my opinion, because they're what I call trauma porn. They're like, showing how screwed up the group was without really educating people how this applies in a real world life situation for you. In any case, explaining the influence continuum, the bite model in Chinese communism or trafficking, and then gently asking questions like, I'm curious, with the information control in our church, we were told that we can't talk to ex-members who are critical. Or we were told we can't look at newspapers and watch TV or whatever. And a lot of it is just trial and error and realizing, and this is my belief system, people have an authentic self. It's not a scientific construct. It's just my life experience that people born in the most horrific, isolated cults still know in their bodies there's something wrong. Like I should be taken care of. I should be fed. I should be loved. There's this DNA towards, I want love, truth, goodness, meaning. So helping people exit themselves, and you're in a role, not I'm going to fix you or I'm going to teach you the truth and liberate you, but rather let me share my story as an ex-Moonie. Let me walk you through the Moonies. Let's look at this video called The Emperor of the Universe that the BBC said. This was the group I was in, and the people are watching it going, you were in that? And I'm like, yeah, I would bow to the floor when Moon entered the room. I would have taken a bullet happily if I was told to. I would have picked up a rifle and shot people if I was ordered to. And they're like, really? And I'm like, really? And then like, oh, so they don't feel like I'm talking down to them, but I'm just sharing with them this journey.
Yeah. And I think it is really important to know that, like, for when you talk to people, that you're not trying to rip them out of something that they love. You're just trying to give them informed consent, essentially.
Right. So I'm looking at the time. I can stay a little bit later, and we want to get Robert in to introduce the bite model. But what I want to say next is words elicit reactions. So if you say to somebody, I don't want to rip you out of the group, they hear you saying, I'm going to rip you out of the group. So you really want to learn, and this is what I teach in the strategic interactive approach, you want to use words that support your values and your goals. I want to empower you to be the best you can be, because you're bright, you're talented, you have creativity, whatever, not making anything up, but whatever that person has. And I value you. And I would like to share, some of my experiences, but learn from you too.
Mm-hmm.
And if the person is feeling like it's their choice and they're making the connections, they'll be asking you questions. And these days we have books, we have podcasts, we have videos, there's this incredible Facebook with 4,000 people on it, where when I left, how could we find other ex-Moonies? Like, it was hard. You had to go to a library in a Dewey Decimal System with these little cards to find a book on cults, and there weren't many, Now you go online and you find 400 books on cults. It's much easier to exit.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to add Robert in here really quick.
Great.
If I can find him. Robert, are you watching on a phone, because that is what we'll have to add you through. So I don't know that I see you in here. You should, if you can also request to go live in here.
And while you're waiting for Robert, I'll keep talking for everybody else. What we're trying to do is take the latest technology and use it for good. So we're wanting to do this bite model analyzer and encourage everybody to, you know, fill out the questions. And it's often when people are looking at, oh, we do this, we do this, we do this, then it's like, oh, this is, you mean this isn't normal? You know, you mean this is the characteristics of the same kind of groups that I'm critical of?
Did you see Robert's comment there, Mike?
Yeah, and I have a list of
well, so it says, how do I request? So there should be a button at the bottom. Which one is it? Is it this one? There's like a little human with a little picture of a human next to it. Is that the one?
I believe.
I think so. Should be like request to.
I can stay on later because
yeah, there we go. We got him.
So people ask me, how are you funded? I fund with people who can afford to pay me for consultations and or speaking engagements or trainings, etc. I've been waiting for a billionaire who I've helped to show up and say, you deserve to have bigger impact and I want to help you, but it hasn't happened in 47 years. So still working.
All right. Well, Robert's attempting to join, and I'm approving it, but it's not popping him in here.
So we put the analyzer on a website, bitemodel.com. So anybody who's listening, if we can't get it to work on Facebook Live, we will implore you, if you want to check out and also contribute to the research on 2x2s, go to bitemodel.com. It's anonymous, and I'd love to get 1,000 responses and be able to write that up. But I also want to state categorically, you know, not everyone's experience is the same. So if you were in leadership, it may have a much higher bite model quotient than if you were more on the fringes, or you're just a public person who occasionally goes to a function. And there's a vast number of ex-members who still believe, you know, like they're physically out, but they're mentally still in. And what I love to do with transcendental meditation, have you ever heard of TM, the Indian guru cult that the Beatles were into? They're making a big comeback. So they teach a meditation technique, and they tell you it's unique to you, and you can never tell anybody what it is because it's secret. In fact, but former leaders are like, there was a chart with how old the person was and where they were, and that was the mantra that they were given. And I would tell people that, and they'd be like, well, I haven't done TM in years, and you know, it wasn't a cult. And I'm like, tell me your mantra. Oh, I can't do that. And I'm like, but you said you're not in it anymore. Yeah, but I can't tell you what my mantra is. And then I tell them, tell me what year you were initiated and how old you were, and I'll tell you your mantra. And then when I tell them, they're like freaked out. How did you know that? It's like, because there's a chart, dude. Oh, there's Robert.
Okay.
Yay.
Great to meet you guys. I just wanted to say,
is Robert
I'm really
sideways or the right way? Because
Robert's great. We can see you perfectly.
So how come I'm sideways and Robert gets to be normal?
No, we need to ask Mark Zuckerberg, I think.
Okay.
Go for it, Robert.
I just want wanted to say, Carrie, I'm really honored to meet you. I was listening to your podcast, and it's incredible what you're doing for these people. I wish I met somebody like you when I was thinking about leaving my group. So thank you for, and
Well,
Mike
tell them
too.
which group you were in, buddy, if you're willing.
I was in an Indian spiritual group called Sri Chinmoy. I worked at the United Nations, and we traveled the world meeting world leaders, and he was very into propaganda and using celebrities to get fame.
And you were celibate for 20 years?
I was celibate, yeah. And meanwhile, there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that I didn't learn about until close to the end of the group. Sexual misconduct. And I really feel I had moral injury. You know, I was fooled for all those years to think that, you know.
Are we signed now?
And you've been out for 20 years, and you're a PhD,
yes,
AI expert.
Yeah, I have a PhD. I worked on the Human Genome Project. I worked on cancer research. I've started a company, raised money. You know, I've done a lot of things since I left, and I wish I had left earlier, because you know those are years you can't get back. And I married this beautiful woman who's really helped me through this whole process too.
Yeah, but now you're doing your healing work, because now you realize it was an actual mind control call.
Yeah, I suppressed it for many years. I didn't want to think about it. I was ashamed of it. And once I started working on it, all this stuff started shifting, and I realized I had some really bad behaviors I learned from the leader of the group that was still affecting my life and my relationships and my work. Mm-hmm. So I started about 4 years ago doing healing work, and it's really shifted. You know, it saved my marriage, and I really encourage people to do some serious work, invest some time and money into finding a good therapist. It's totally critical to having a successful life once you leave a group like the 2x2s.
So share Robert's been laboring mightily on this project.
Yeah,
this bite model analyzer.
Yeah, so if you go to bitemodel.com, we've got a survey based on Steve's PhD. It's got 132 questions. It's a lot of questions. I'm working on a way to shorten it so you don't have to answer all the questions. But basically at the end, you get a score of how authoritarian your group is. And it's not just for cults. It could apply to companies. It could apply to individuals or leaders. It could be used by women who have abusive partners and to try to evaluate how abusive their partner is. So it's a very objective score. And on the last page, you click on results and it'll give you your score from 0 to 10. 10 means it's very authoritarian. 0 means it's a healthy group or leader. And we want this thing to go viral. We want people to, you know, take your own score, share it on social media. And eventually, I hope that people who are in cults will be able to take this survey and make their own conclusions. We're going to write a paper, hopefully on the 2x2s, if we get enough people that want to fill this out. And I think one thing I wanted to echo is that it's tempting to send this thing directly to your friends in the group, but I recommend you don't do that yet, because as Steve says, you really want to do it in a way that they don't feel threatened by this thing. And Steve's got a whole chapter in his book on how to talk to people in groups so you don't piss them off.
I already covered a couple of points.
Yeah, you did in the talk.
There's a lot to it, but the first thing is just psychoeducation for yourself to really understand.
Yeah, so the 132 questions are actually therapeutic, but if you fill out the blank space, just going through the questions yourself and answering for yourself, I had a hard time when I first did the survey because I hadn't really thought about this stuff, and it's actually therapeutic just to fill out the survey. So I recommend everybody try it out at bitemodel.com, and it's very new, so it probably has bugs. So let me know or Mike know.
Yeah. And if you have examples of, you know, behavior control that isn't on the list, add them, you know, or email us. And let us know.
Yeah. And the wording may not be exactly right. You know, the wording sometimes doesn't make sense. So or the choices in the pick list don't line up perfectly, but just think about it as a scale from 0 to 6 or so.
Or never
But I'd love to
to
get your feedback.
always.
Where can people email you guys?
The main email for my company is center, CENTER, at freedomofmind.com.
Okay.
And I get the email, and my assistant Jim, who does all the operations stuff to keep this going, he'll get it as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, and we're going to also put the scores eventually for the Moonies, the Mormons and the JWs. We have data from Steve's PhD, so you can compare the score of 2x2s versus Mormons versus healthy groups like Buddhists or other Christian groups. We also have data on Catholics, which score much lower than obviously the Mormons. So going forward, I would love to make this thing go viral so that people will, use it sort of to score even companies they work for, or therapists, or it can be used in many different situations. I think Steve has already talked about that.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd invite people to come to my website where it says blogs and just scroll through all the different guests I've had, because I try to cover a lot of not only undue influence, but do influence things, healthy things, like this woman, Monica Parker, teaches wonder. And I love wonder, and I love awe, and I love, positive things like good sleep hygiene. We did one on that, etc.
Did you have a
Yeah,
comment?
and I also, on a personal note, would like to mention that having a spouse who's been through trauma can be very difficult to deal with, and I would personally like to start a men's group where we what's it like to be a man married to somebody who's experienced sexual or physical trauma, because it requires this special kind of sensitivity, and I struggled with that for many years, and I think people in this group may have similar experiences.
Good
Yeah,
point.
really great idea.
And then there are spouses of people who were born in a cult who don't know anything about cults, and they never understood it. And reading Combating and having conversations about what it was like growing up is also really therapeutic.
Somebody was asking in the questionnaire thing, if there is something that they don't know the answer to, is it better for them to leave that blank?
Yes, leave it blank. Don't select something.
That'll still work. Okay.
Yeah, you can just skip over any question you're not sure about, and
we should add that to the instructions, Robert.
Yeah, there's a comments box at the end. I'll put a bug report thing in there too, but at the very last question you can put in suggestions of how to improve it.
Okay.
Or whatever's confusing, please let us know. Either email center at Freedom of Mind, or put it in the suggestion at the end.
So what I'd like to do before we end, if we can stay on for a few more minutes, is that okay with you guys?
Absolutely. Yep.
So I want to just talk for a few minutes. Is that okay, Robert, or is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's great.
Thank you, Robert. We appreciate
So
your input.
I want to just give a frame of how I look at healing from an undue influence thing, okay? And this is very different than typical therapists. So what I say to my clients is, mind control is a dissociative disorder. And what really will help is for you to be in your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because your body, when I interview people who are in cults and they tell me about their horrible experiences, they can tell me, I knew there was something wrong. I had a feeling in my gut, or I had this sense in my body, and then they didn't listen to it. And part of healing is being operationally in your body. And now they know scientifically there are neurons in our gut. They're actually neurons, not just in our brain, but in our gut. We want to be in our bodies. We want to be in the here and now. That's another very important concept. And I know some people may say that's woo-woo, Steve, being in the here and now. But the brain the brain and we're mind-body organisms, and we exist in the now. The past is already done, it's memories. The future hasn't happened yet. So healing has to be done in the now. And where trauma therapists are in error, the way they approach helping victims or survivors of trauma, is they think somehow going back into trauma and reliving it is going to help people get better. That's not my experience or my training at all, because you're re-victimizing yourself. I'll just use a quick example from my Mooney experience. When I had my accident, I mentioned that, a van crash, I woke up from falling asleep, driving into the back of an 18-wheeler truck at 80 miles an hour. And if I remember that experience as it was 47 years ago, I wouldn't be able to drive a car on a highway near a truck. I just wouldn't.
What's the method? What's the method?
I'll tell you.
Go ahead.
So the key is understanding the human mind has the capacity to categorize memories either as associated memories or dissociated memories. Associated memories in this definition is you reliving it. So you're back in the experience. Dissociated, Steve in the here and now talking to on Facebook Live can remember the younger Steve, who is 21 years old, like there's a video camera, seeing Steve driving into the back of a tractor trailer truck. There's no pain, there's no terror. I'm not worried I'm going to blow up as it actually was 47 years ago. I'm safe in my chair in front of my phone in my office, right? So be able to take all of your positive memories of your childhood and your life, make them associated so you have the goodies. You know, if you love surfing, you're back on the waves. I love scuba diving. I can relive that experience in the here and now. Wonderful. But all the trauma stuff, that's a movie. It's real. I'm not denying that it didn't happen, the bad stuff. But it's not me. The me is in the here and now, right here and right now.
Yeah,
Another,
if I could interrupt, Steve,
please.
there's a key point that you made in your book, and that's that we all have two identities. We have our true identity, and we have our cult identity. And my wife can tell when I switch between those identities. It's like striking. And I think it's really important psychologically for people to understand that cult identity is not the real you.
I like calling it exoskeleton is what I heard one time, and what really resonated with me was that I was wearing an exoskeleton. And I know how to put it back on.
Wow.
You know, but
I know how to be a Mooney too,
yeah.
but yeah. But the key is it's not the real you.
Yeah.
You don't need that anymore,
Yeah.
right?
Great.
So another thing that I teach my clients, that was a very good point, Robert. Thank you for sharing that, is to have an internal locus of control for you. Because when you're in a mind control cult, you're taught to surrender your power to the authority figures, whether it's your parents or the elders or the overseers or the governing body or the prophet or whatever. No, you need to be in charge of you. And this is like a muscle that you need to exercise till you get really strong at making your own decisions. And one of the things my clients always need to get over is the perfectionism crap. And when I read Lifton's book on Chinese communist brainwashing and his 8 criteria, he called it the demand for purity, the demand for perfection. And nobody's perfect. Therefore, you're always going to feel shamed, embarrassed, insufficient if you use perfectionism. Start with, I'm a human being and nobody's perfect. I just want to learn. I just want to grow. I want to be my true self. I want to be the best person I can. I want to have meaningful relationships, do meaningful work, and feel good about myself for what I do. Lastly, there's more, but I'm giving you the core pieces, is you want to have a positive future orientation. And that's where people have anxiety disorders and everything else, because they're operating from the perfectionism thing. And they're like, I don't know what I want to do. I need to have the perfect career or the perfect wife or the perfect husband or whatever. And that doesn't exist. And so you have to, again, come back to reality and know we do the best we can with the information and experiences that we have. It helps when we have good friends and other people who can, weigh in on important decisions. But you want to really see the happy future you that you want to become. Like
Yeah, and I'm sure
for
that
me,
the
yeah, go ahead.
perfectionism that you mentioned is going to resonate with a lot of our members, because that scrupulosity was a very much a thing for many of us. And every week we would go into a meeting and explain how we had failed that last week and how we wanted to do better the next week. And
So
just
that's the cult of confession in Lifton, and scrupulosity is a loaded language term that comes under thought control, by the way. That's a word that most cults don't use. Scrupulosity. Thank you for teaching me that one.
Actually, I have a question for Carrie. When I joined my group, I was 18. I knew what my childhood, a normal childhood, was like. But for you guys, you're all born into the group. Do you have a problem? Like, how do you know what normal is? I'm just curious.
I don't think we do.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I only left 3 years ago. One thing that I have found to be very healing is having our own children. And we left when they were pretty little, like 4, 6, and 8. So being able to parent them in the way that I wasn't parented, I didn't have a bad childhood. I have great parents, but outside of meetings and being able to give them the autonomy to be who they are and to wear their hair the way that they want to, and to say things that I wasn't allowed to say, or, having autonomy over themselves, being able to make their own choices about what they believe, all of that has been really, really healing. And making other mom friends outside of the meeting community and, getting kind of feedback, watching how they interact with their kids has been really helpful.
That's a very, very important point. A lot of people leave cults when they have kids because they realize, I don't want to subject my daughter to this crap, or my
big thing for
son.
us. Yep.
And were you corporally punished in your cult? Were you beaten or hit or paddled?
Yeah.
So you know that that's illegal in most civilized countries outside of the United States, right? You know that it creates trauma, that it is the wrong side of the influence continuum, but you are training obedience instead of play and adventurousness and risk-taking and a love
Curiosity,
for
asking
learning.
questions.
Yeah, so that's really important. I want to mention a blog and an interview I have on my website with a woman who is, I think she's 97 now. Her name is Molly Koch, and she taught parenting workshops in Baltimore for 50 years. And she wrote a book called 27 Secrets for Raising Amazing Children. And it's a parenting book, basically. I don't know if it's still in print, but it's a wonderful, and I did tell her I would put it back in print after she passes away. But it basically is like really realizing your child is not you. It's not a clone of you. Your child is unique. And you want to instill that, just how special they are. And you want to definitely protect them from being online screens. Longer the better. And I interviewed a Harvard psychiatrist who wrote a book, Rewired. He says, don't even let children look at TV screens till at least 3 years of age. Why? Because the brain of an infant needs human interaction with mirror neurons. And a child that keeps hearing from their mother, father, aunt, uncle, oh, you're so precious, I love you, and that's what helps children feel loved. They're the center of the universe. They feel safe, they feel secure. It's what we call secure attachment. Happens in the first couple of years, but it's not from screens. It's from that feeling mom's heartbeat, smelling mom's skin, dad's skin, the eye contact, the reading books to the infant, the playing music, but with love in your heart. That's what is going to grow healthy little ones.
Very good. Well, I think we can probably wrap it up here, Steve, but I thank you very, very much for coming on, and again, you as well, Robert. Really appreciate.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
I think it's wonderful what you're doing, and I think that there's hope to help people who are still in the group. And the best way to influence them is be happy and live a great life and be in touch with them and be loving with them and let them see, because you're the phobia cure, right?
Right.
If you're in the cult, you're told, oh, Satan's gonna possess you if you leave, and it's like, no, I'm happy, thanks very much, you know.
There's a lot of people who have left this year, and that's one of the things they expressed was that the people who had already left, they were good people and they were kind people and they didn't implode.
Yes.
It does make a difference, yeah.
Huge. Well, that's how my deprogramming went, because there were 3 ex-Moonies, one of whom I had recruited into the cult and who had left. And they were good people and they made sense and they still loved God and they weren't doing sex, drugs, and rock and roll as I had been. They didn't have demons coming out of their eyeballs and levitating and spewing green goo, right? They were just good people caring about me, wanting me to realize Moon wasn't the Messiah, that this was never going to be a group that was going to fulfill the goals that they espoused.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay.
Well,
happy Saturday.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
BiteModel.com.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
guys.
Freedom
Look forward
of
to
mind.
connecting.
Yeah. Have a great one.
all right.
Bye.
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 Bye.